The right to work, the right to earn a living. That's my contribution.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks. I think that what COVID-19 has done, especially I'll speak from the investigative journalism world and the journalism world at large. What happened in the last couple of months, 3-4 months, have been really telling for us as a country in the growth of our democracy and human rights. Uganda was going through an election during COVID-19.
The right to...
All right. So Uganda was going through a general election at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in there were so many intricacies because government then was saying, we are observing the COVID-19 SOPs, and they put out a lot of information on COVID-19. And what happened during the elections were marred by a lot of violence. Violence, including violence against politicians, against normal wananchi, violence against the media. We all remember the infamous November 28th that had over 50 people who were murdered and killed. And all that was attached to COVID-19 and the campaigning. We know, for example, journalists were beaten, some of them battered, and others broken during the elections that, of course, happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. And government was giving one justification: we are implementing the SOPs of COVID-19. So within the whole umbrella of COVID-19, lots of gross human rights violations were committed that government closed its eyes to and ears to and fronted COVID-19. And so aspects of, the murder, the torture, all the gross human rights violations that have been documented in different reports have been neglected by the state, and therefore there's not been any form of accountability to the people who committed these violations, all in the name of COVID-19. And so from where I sit, the African Institute for Investigative Journalism, we feel that that's an area that has really been neglected because of COVID-19. And so the conversation is now moving away from the atrocities that were committed to more on vaccination, to more of, the whole conversation around the budget process. And before you know it, it will be the swearing in. And so we're moving on very fast, leaving behind bleeding wounds that may affect this country if we do not tackle them. So I think that one of the key priority areas that was neglected because of COVID-19 is an issue of accountability, is an issue of the gross human rights violations that were committed in this country 3 months ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Solomon. Charity?
Thank you, Daniel.
If you could turn on your mic.
Oh, great. Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. My greetings to everybody that's been able to tune in. When I reflect on the pandemic, this is something that affected every human being on the planet. And, when we're speaking about human rights violation, in there, I think the key word is human. What does it mean to be human? Yeah. Being human doesn't mean that I have to be a politician. There were those stickers for special people, the police, based on what you look like or the way you present yourself, would decide how they treat you. And I feel to a larger extent, it really gave all of us a moment to just pause and reflect. What does it mean to just be a human? And you'd go online and people are so angry because these are unprecedented times. Yeah, we've never gone through this. Not the United States with all the movies and predictions that they have in their movies. Media didn't know what to report on, how to report on. We were just thrown in chaos. But I think essentially what was really important is to remember what it's like to be human. And there were so many fingers being pointed here, there. Who's to blame? Who's responsible? But I don't think that a lot of us took a moment to point the finger back at ourselves. What was happening in our own backyard? Did you move around to see if your, your neighbor, the lady that wakes up very early every day to sell vegetables to, is she okay? And right in there, you would start to find that being a human rights defender, being an activist, first and foremost, starts with you. And having that ability to empathize at a level that is just, within your sphere. This has nothing to do with whether the government is going to bring posho. They have a mandate and there's so many flaws, but ultimately, like, what are you doing as a human being to ensure that the people that you relate with every single day are treated justly? Do you also treat the human beings that you interact with every day as human beings, as fellow human beings? Which leads me up again to what I'm really passionate about, which is inclusion. Yeah, who do we speak for when we speak about violations, when we speak about inclusion? Who is supposed to be included? And I hope that the pandemic, with all the nastiness that it brought forward, really gave each of us a chance to reflect and think, am I included? Is he included? Is she included? Is everybody included in the problem-solving processes that we are currently, all embarking on?
Thank you, Charity. Elvis, could we hear your thoughts?
So for me, when we look at 2020 during COVID, I don't like saying during COVID because we are still in COVID. Yeah, I never knew that working home, it will be very difficult for me. And also for the community I serve, the LGBT and sex workers, being able that these are people who wake up every day to go to their offices, and right now they're under the lockdown. They don't know how to use the internet. They cannot access the internet wherever they are because they live in different areas. So it was difficult for them to deliver deadlines and reporting back to the donors and all that. It was kind of difficult for them. And you would find community members not accessing services the way they would need them. Like Charity said, like you would find special people having stickers on their cars. For community members, that was not the case because for them, they had to walk long distance to go and access the services they needed. So I feel like, yeah, the human rights for community members, especially when it comes to the LGBT and sex work community, they were not served very well during the lockdown or during the COVID period, because these are people who are left behind. You would find sex workers, their brothels have been locked. They cannot access food. These are people who have been getting what to eat from their brothels where they work from. Right now they are closed and all that. So it was somehow very difficult for them, because getting a meal to feed their families, it was also difficult. And also the gender-based violence which took place during that time, whereby now we are at that higher risk where that anyone could attack us everywhere, because they know that at the end of the day, no one is going to help you, no one is going to serve you, no one is going to do anything. So they would attack us. Like currently, homophobia and increase of violence, it's increasing within the community, the LGBT community, especially to the transgender women. They're getting beaten every time. So I feel like, yes, we started advocating and all that, but kind of 2020, it has pushed us back in like 2 years back. It's like our advocacy has gone to waste. Thank you.
Yes, please. Lindsay, you have something to talk about.
Yes, I have something very important to say. Thank you, Charity, for bringing it back into my head. During COVID-19, what many of you may not be aware of is that there was discrimination in how they carried out the lockdown restrictions. A friend of mine was walking with another friend after lockdown, and they found policemen who had a group of people lying down on the floor, and they were beating them like they beat people in school. And they let my friends go because they were bourgeoisie, so to speak. So the police were only enforcing the punishments on, what do we call them in terms of class? And it's a terrible way to say it. I know. But if you look like him, you didn't get beaten. If you are a market woman, you got beaten. Yes. So that there was discrimination when it came to human rights. Some people became more human than others.
Thank you for sharing that reminder, Lindsay. And I think we can all agree that there were perhaps gross violations observed in all our different sectors. And maybe which just leads me to my first question after you've set the foundation with that. How might we be able to promote justice and fair treatment for all, in digital environments, for example? And maybe I'd like to start with Elvis on this.
So how might we promote justice or inclusion within the new world? Because for me, I love calling it the new normal because it's what we are living in. We're not changing it. We're just going forward. So when it comes to that, it's all about empowering the community, especially when it comes to marginalized communities. Persons living with disabilities, what do we think of them? Because they're not getting the services they need. They're not being heard. When we talk about sex workers, when we talk about young women, when we talk about young mothers. So what are we doing about that? Are we empowering them? Are we just leaving them there? So I feel like there is need to be inclusive because it's time for us to be inclusive. Most of the time we have not been inclusive, whereby when you find that, yes, I'm a person living with HIV, I cannot interact with a person who is not living with HIV. So it's time for us to be inclusive in everything we do. When it comes to digitalization, we need to be inclusive. We don't need to leave others behind because already we have been left behind. It's time for us to be included in everything. And also something I loved in today's session because designing with the user, not designing for the user. We need to also get involved in everything because usually you find that organizations or agents design something but without consulting us because at the end of the day they feel like they know us better. Because for me being here or for you speaking on my behalf doesn't mean that you know me better because I know myself very well and I know what I really need. So I feel like there is need to include marginalized communities in digital spaces.
Thank you, Elvis. If we could just follow along the direction.
Action groups. We need action groups. Have you seen how the COPs are arranged? Imagine if we had that with our different human rights organizations. All those resources put together, not one action group, action groups, because each organization has a different target, has a different goal, different mandate. So if you had one action group, in that action group, you would have maybe 2 or 3 different organizations, and that would be hundreds of people in one action group. So say you have 6 action groups. To alone, there is nothing that we can do. Together, the more that we are, the more that we can do. So I really believe in the formation of action groups. And I don't mean Women of Uganda Network. I mean, there's Women of Uganda Network, there's Women Human Rights Defenders Network. I mean, if they had an action group that included all those different organizations, and then they said, let us target this particular law, let us target this particular policy, let us bring our resources together, let us get justice for this person. An action group might have amazing people like Solomon in it. Imagine 10 Solomons in an action group. What could not be done? People have power. We have power and we need to use it. And for me, it is just action groups. It's time to take action and stop talking.
Thank you very much for that, Lindsay. Very powerful remarks. Action groups. And just for clarity for our audience, when she meant what she meant by COPs earlier are communities of practice, which are convenings that are brought together, supported by the Digital Human Rights Lab, to work on different topics and thematic areas. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Solomon, a penny for your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a couple of days back, I visited Ashraf Kasidie, who is a journalist working with Radio One and an online television called, I think, Ghetto TV. What we saw happen to Ashraf, I visited him in hospital and he was in Rubaga. And I just wanted to go and check on him and find out how he's doing following the shooting incident that we all watched on our different televisions. We saw a guy who was bleeding from the head, struggling for his life. When I visited him, he struggled with memory loss. He was with the wife, he has children, he can't work anymore. His right to work was violated. He's struggling with memory loss. And as a whole family is struggling. And this is a journalist. He's one of the people who is documented in our statistics of over 71 journalists who was arrested and tortured during the elections. And I've really been thinking, how do we hold the men and women who committed these atrocities to book, right? Because we only read them in reports. We know that different people are coming up with reports documenting all these things, and yet they remain statistics. So the question has been, how do we seek for social justice and accountability for the men and women who committed these atrocities and are still walking on our streets? And the digital space has provided some of the answers. What we're doing at the African Institute for Investigative Journalism is employing open source investigations to try to isolate these individual police officers and army officers who committed these atrocities. And how do we do it? Open source investigations uses information that is on the digital web, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, the stories that have been put up by different media houses, the pictures that have been published, digital maps, Google Maps, and experiences of different people in the different social media spaces and digital spaces to try to zero down on these independent officers who actually committed these atrocities. We are at a stage of collecting information and doing digital dive-ins and looking for different information online, stories that were published on that day, articles that have been written, pictures that were taken, videos that were taken by independent people in the public. And we're trying to curate this information and create, try to come up with a body of evidence and a body of works that can be used to pin independent, police officers or security officers who actually abuse rights of people. There's a woman who called me just last week, and we all know about this lady who had a bullet stuck in her in her spine. And we all know of a woman who lost 2 children during this whole scuffle. All those are individual stories of people who are still nursing the wounds of the whole violence that was committed against the public, but there's no form of justification. So we want to call upon the public to bring any available evidence or footage or something. We as well want to call on the digital community online and the whole COPs that we've been hearing here to, come and join us in trying to provide some sort of evidence to put these men and women to account so that there is social justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Solomon. Charity, could we hear your thoughts as well on this?
Thank you. And I'm actually glad that I'm answering last rather. Just listening to Solomon and Lindsay and Elvis, and these are people who are trying to challenge really massive problems, yeah, and problems that are affecting millions of Ugandans. And I like that Elvis, you're talking about this is the new normal. We're living in this digital space, yeah. First, put aside these human rights violations. There is all of this stuff that's going on, and then we're also living in this digital age, yeah. And there's this obsession with this is the new normal, but the new normal for who? Yeah, for who? Only about actually 20% is pushing it. Less than 20% of our Ugandan population, which is over 40 million Ugandans, yeah, less than 20% have access to these internet tools. Yeah. That means the majority of the people you're talking about, Solomon, don't even have the ability to record something on a mobile device and share it. How do we then solve for those people? Yeah. The people that are voiceless, the people that are not taken into account as problem solvers, how do you think about them as well? And this is where we get into inclusion. I think we need a more human-centered approach towards human rights. Yeah, where it's about the people that you're serving first and foremost. How do you leverage your access to these tools, to this internet, to iRoom, this online portal? How do you leverage all of that information to help people whose data, the greater percentage, their data is not even captured? So that means the problems that they're actually facing, the majority of those Ugandans, we don't even have it. Because where are they going to share that data? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, when we're talking about the digital age and we're talking about technology, this radical thing that's going to create massive transformation, we always talk about data and tech as if it is a thing that's other than. But data essentially is human. The tech space is human. It's an extension of who we are. And so when you keep that in mind and you start to treat these platforms, this information, not as just a thing, not as just a video. I say, investigative journalism. Has anybody thought about the effect and the desensitization that a lot of the content that's put out is doing to Ugandans? Because now, if everyone is a bloody picture, bullet in the head, I've seen it today, tomorrow, 3 times, then I'll just make jokes about it at the next comedy stand-up show. I mean, we've been desensitized. Who's responsible for the desensitization? And so that's what it means to think twice. Is it about what I feel, or is it about what the 80% that are voiceless, that don't have access to express themselves? How can I speak for those people? How can I innovate for those people? How can I design solutions that are addressing their problems and not my feelings? I think that's what we really need to kickstart our problem-solving process in the human rights space.
Yeah, I think that very, very, very lovely thoughts and well-informed thoughts all across the board from our panelists. And it's a good thing that we've started talking about technology and innovation. And I think the next question is along those lines. And, we are celebrating innovation a lot. Social media in all its forms. I mean, there's almost a new platform every day. How many are on TikTok, for example? And I'm told it's the new in thing, and I'm not on it yet. There's AI, artificial intelligence, which everyone is flaunting. There's VR, virtual reality. There's AR, augmented reality. And even the definitions of these terms are scary. And along with all this have come, issues like cyber harassment, bullying linked to gender and sexuality, and extreme infringements of privacy, like revenge porn, which we see a lot here in Uganda especially. So what steps could we take to put these issues that are arising on top of the agenda? And maybe I'll start with you, Solomon, from the media perspective, then Elvis, you might share, then we'll hear from the ladies.
I think that what social media has done, in my view, is to break the very backbone of traditional media. Before, you had to wait for news, rush home and catch news. But what social media does is that you get the news as it happens, right? You get the news as it happens. Everything happens as by the time you go home, you pretty much know what has happened in the day. Perhaps what you go to traditional media to do is to confirm, right? These whole allegations that you've been using on your phone all throughout the day. I think that then we need to leverage on that space. We need to leverage on, how do we use those spaces well? I mean, there's just using them, but how do we use them well? I think that what she said really touched my heart, that every time you share videos of, people, and you have a bullet in the head, or it just becomes normal, and we start joking around it. And before you know it, it has become, we've seen that, zero. But how do we leverage on social media and the available to ensure that we observe human rights? And you talked about the issue of privacy. I think many of us, we need to be sensitized about this whole issue of privacy. And I was listening carefully to Brian when he was making his presentation. Have you ever been online and they ask you, for you to access this website, you have to accept the cookies? Then you just click, 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 but you leave a digital footprint that can be used or against you. And I think we saw that so many times on these different, how the different digital spaces are collecting evidence, like information that they use to do market research and directed. I mean, we all remember the Cambridge Analytica event that happened in the world that caused the whole conversation around data privacy. And I think that we need to be sensitized on how do we use the social media and digital space to ensure that our privacy, but we also need to use social media for more valuable things. I love the fact that TikTok now is moving. Okay, of course, I mean, it depends on really how you use it. There's those TikTok things that make us happy all the time. Like if I'm really, really, really stressed, I'll go on TikTok and just scroll through and laugh. But there's also a new breed of people using TikTok for I don't want to say more useful bits, but yeah, away from the fun of redoing songs and echoing people's and doing all these short videos. But now we're using TikTok perhaps more for accountability and advancing human rights. Thanks.
Thank you, Solomon. Elvis.
Yeah, for me, yes, social media, it's good, but sometimes I feel like it's going to be our downfall, because most of the time we put out everything in social media. Like for example on Facebook, when Facebook, Instagram, we want to post everywhere we go. For example, I'm here at Royal Suits. Oh, I'm here at, or maybe in a different location or a bar and all that, without forgetting that your security also matters, which is the most important thing. So I feel like there's need more sensitization as well as more training on how do you use social medias. How do you use a different element to make sure that your privacy is private? What kind of information should I share with the rest of the world, and what kind of information should I leave behind? Because you find that most of the community members, especially in the marginalized community, they are blackmailed because of the pictures they love sending. Yes, I know, like sending nude pictures, it will be very good at that moment because you're in love and you're all that, but at the end of the day, it can turn around because you don't know who you are sending it to. Do you trust the person? Do you feel like, yeah, this person is the right person to have this or that? So another thing, because you find you invite someone and the person goes through your phone, he takes all your information and all that. So there's need to, how can we train people on how to use social media? How can we make sure that they have the security they need? You would find, usually I tell my friends I don't give my son my phone because I know my phone has a lot of things, because by mistake he might end up sending a message to someone. Like I would give an example. There's a day when I was trying to send a message to a friend, forgetting that a friend she had given the phone to her son. So you just imagine like the kind of message I was sending, thinking that I was chatting with my friend, not knowing I was chatting with her son. So it's kind of difficult there also. And also there is need to sensitize about the privacy policies which are in the digital world. Because when it comes to our community, we don't know those policies. We don't know that I have a right to privacy. I have a right to surf anything I want on internet as long as I'm on my phone and all that. So there's need to train the community on policies so that they get to know where should I stop and where can I continue from.
Thank you. And Lindsay, I would really love to hear what you think about.
No pressure. Number one, I believe that it is time for us to start to expose abusers on the internet. They know that the target is going to be on the people that they are abusing. And this came to me because of what happened recently with Judith Hard. Show of hands, who is aware of the abuse Judith had endured when she put up a picture of herself a few weeks ago? Show of hands? Nobody? You are? Yes. Yes, so she put up a picture because she's a model. And she got about hundreds of insults about her weight, about, how she had lost weight. It was terrible. And they started saying, you have a big bean. Bean means clitoris. That's how deep the insults became. So what her empire is doing because of this incident is we are starting a project, it's still secret, where we are going to be exposing abusers. Your digital footprint will be there forever and ever. And the condition to pull down what we want to do is we ask victims to send us screenshots of abuse, and then we have a platform where we are going to be putting that up with your name, the abuser. So if you want your screenshot pulled down, you need to send an apology to the person that you abused, and then you pull the screenshot down. Otherwise, you remain on the internet like that, and when you want to go and you want to work in a human rights organization, peace ain't gonna happen. I also want to talk about the role of the media. I'm very glad Solomon is here. I was with Judith Hard when NBS Uncut was interviewing her. So the arrangement we had made with NBS Uncut was to talk about what body shaming online does to women. Now, your two journalists proceeded to become the trolls that we block on social media. They bullied Judith Hard. Like, why do you put your pictures up? Why do you have to do this? Why don't you expect that? And then they went further. They entered another country entirely. So we hear you're dating this person. We hear you're a pimp. Judith Hard broke down. And the journalists had to switch off their cameras. She had to go away. And I had to tell these people that are you journalists? Because isn't journalism about human rights? Are you people journalists? Seriously. And the eventual interview that was aired was after she had come back from the bathroom. So she had canceled the interview entirely. So after I wouldn't say I spoke with them more than argued vigorously, the interview became a normal interview. So people now watch it online and say, oh yeah, but they don't know what those journalists did to Judith before we had to cut it out. Shows like that should not exist anymore. Why do we still have shows like that existing that celebrate the denigration of women, that celebrate making fun of women? Why do we still have this, I don't know what to call it, this abusive paparazzi on television? We don't need it. We need to start really, I wouldn't say attack, but fighting how the media houses represent women. Because what they wanted to do was turn Judith into another fun conversation for you to all laugh about as you watch the show. The media plays such a huge role in abusing women online, and this spills offline into their personal lives. So I don't know how we're going to do that, but I'm thinking, and I hope you're all thinking too. Last, second last, the Defenders Protection Initiative has developed a beautiful incident reporting tool for violence online. So this is the first of its kind, I think, in Uganda. I stand to be corrected. I don't mind being sued. I haven't come across anything else like it. So when you've been violated, you simply go to this tool and you fill in the violation, how it happened, where it happened, etc. And this is where action groups come in. Because DPI does not work alone, they can reach out to anybody, any organization, and we can tackle each case and get justice. That is the importance of action groups. So we've actually already started inadvertently. So if you want to have access to this incident reporting tool, please go to Brian and he will give you the link. Privacy has been mentioned a lot. I could write a thesis on privacy, but I just want to talk about Facebook. By show of hands, how many of you are aware that on your devices, Facebook does not just track what you do on Facebook. Facebook tracks what you do everywhere. Show of hands. Who is aware of that? Okay. Now, there is a way to disable that feature. If you're interested, you can catch me, I don't know when, after I've eaten. Yes. Yeah, so it's really scary because when I first saw it, Facebook had, I was like, Facebook man, stay on your lane. Why do you want to know what I'm doing on Twitter, on LinkedIn? Why do you want to know what I'm doing this, here, there? So yeah, that's something that I would like all of you to be aware of if you have the Facebook application on your devices. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. And earlier you had a touching story, and we appreciate you for standing in for your friend. And we also look forward to you launching this tool to counter cyber harassment. Yeah. Could we hear your thoughts, Charity?
I kind of like that I get to go last. You get to listen into what everybody has to say, and then you're like, then I have to change what I'm going to say because I get inspired. So it's good that you just talked about Facebook, the big tech corporations. And so in line with your question, Daniel, all those big words, AI, I'm sure like the bigger percentage of our population doesn't even know what that is, yeah? Again, just going back, human-centered. It's about the people, yeah? So do we have any regulations? Do we have any policymakers that are coming up with laws that are dictating how websites or user interfaces should be? Have you can tell a well-designed website. There's one where you go, it says, okay, we want your cookies. You can only accept this one, it's fine. Or maybe extra for marketing. You choose which one you want. Okay. Then there are those ones that put a giant banner on the screen, accept or die. There should be laws on that. Why should you threaten a user on the internet to give you their data? Because that literally, you're bullying me into accepting you to utilize my data. And a lot of us probably have websites that are working like that. I hope you'll go back and check yourselves. And so this, goes back to human-centered approach to human rights. Yeah. People usually think that a designer is someone that went to design school and, plays around with colors to make very interesting visuals. No, each and every one of you here in this room is a designer because ultimately you are putting content out there. You have a Facebook page, a Twitter page. It is a representation of who you are, of your brand. So be conscious about it. And I'm glad that you said we need more sensitization. Absolutely. People need to know that they have the right and the power to tell Facebook that what you're doing is just outright immoral. We have the power. And then the other thing is, there's an MIT researcher, black girl, African girl. She got there, she's excited about AI, and she was creating a mirror that was supposed to give her positive affirmations, but the AI just wasn't working. And guess what? Prior to her, everybody that was writing that code had been a white male. Have you guys tried? You buy a phone, you spend your millions on it. It will do facial recognition for someone that's Caucasian or Asian. But on a lot of African people, most facial recognition doesn't work. Well, that's because we don't have people that look like you and I writing that code. These platforms, Facebook, Twitter, the internet, it's not something that came from space. No, people like you and I invested years to write lines of code, and they're the ones telling these platforms what to do. And we've seen instances like in Europe recently, they had to pass laws banning, like the police from using AI for facial recognition because it was biased to get black people and Arab people arrested or stopped, because I don't know if you guys are aware, like in China right now, facial recognition, AI is determining who is a good citizen or who isn't based on the things that you do every day. Do I want to be policed? You get, when our government says they're instituting cameras to watch over us, are they really watching over us? Or is AI being engineered to just see all these faces every day and say that day we want to increment Solomon? We know exactly how to extrapolate that data. So, do we have policymakers in this room that are actively thinking about how this tech is being created? Are they including people? The power is within our hands. Each and every one of us has the power to say we are raising a concern over the machines that were bought in from China, and yet they were trained to look at Chinese faces or Asian faces, and yet we're black Bantu people. Like, do I know if those cameras will work for me or work in the same way that they're meant to work for me? So, raising that awareness, raising that consciousness, and asking those questions at every single level. And hopefully, in the long run, at a policy-making level, to have our parliament sitting and saying that you shouldn't have a manipulative website, or you shouldn't have content out there that's going to make people, feel a certain type of way.
Wow, indeed. So our time is fast spent. I mean, it's already been an hour. It feels like we've just started. I would like to start with Charity with our final closing remarks, and maybe you can just give a line or two on what you think about the statement I'm about to ask. Charity, do you think data privacy is a human right?
I think everything I've been saying has been trying to prove that it is. And this is why data is human. There is no data without humans. So my rights in the physical realm also apply in the digital realm. Ultimately, all the rights that I have offline should be instituted online as well.
Great. Solomon, your thoughts?
I certainly think that data is a human right. And, and today, my takeaway from this conversation today is that we are first humans. And Charity, thank you for stamping that on my heart. That everything about human rights is first of all human. And she said that they cannot be data without humans. At the end of the day, it comes to that. there is an investigation that was concluded on how one of the agents in this country was profiting from people's data. Think of it like an extrapolation of Cambridge Analytica. But then, they would then find a way of selling that data to a firm in New York, and they can run data sets to find a way of strategically doing marketing. You think of big farms setting up in Uganda, you think it's just by coincidence that big farms from the US or from Europe are setting up shop. No, they do market surveys. And do they invest money in people coming here to do market surveys? No, they have someone who goes to them and say, I have data on Uganda. I know where Ugandans go at night. I know what are the different eating places. I know everything about data. And how do they do that? By collecting that data from your phones when you are filling in, these applications that we all download. They tell you where do you stay? They monitor if you're moving from here. Just the other day, Google sent me my travel history on email. Like, you've been in these different places. I'm like, damn, how did you know? Right? And so we leave our data all scattered all over the internet, and it's being used to make money for multi-million enterprises without even you knowing. And I think it's important that you know how your data is being used, that you know that someone is spying on you. I've just learned today that Facebook also knows what I'm doing on Twitter and on LinkedIn. I was like shocked, so like all these things we don't know, many people do not know. So I think that even when we are promoting that data is a human right, which I believe the people themselves need to be sensitized that it is a human right and that you deserve to know how your data is being used.
Thank you, Solomon. And parting shots, Lindsay, what do you think?
I love your question. I love his question because in Uganda we have forgotten that rights are rights. We ask for permission for our own rights. For example, a lady I knew was taking photographs near a prison here in Uganda, and the security guard, she wasn't even anywhere near, but the security guard confiscated her phone. How? How do you? We have reached that point where we also just hand over. We don't challenge, the Data Privacy Act is not being enacted. When I signed into this hotel, for example, I was very concerned when they asked where I live. And when I asked, why do you want to know where I live? Why is this in the book? You're not allowed to ask questions. You're supposed to just follow orders. And it became almost a fight. Ask my friend here, Timothy. When he came in, he's like, Lindsay, what's going on? Like, I'm asking reasonable questions here. Why do they want to know where I live? It doesn't make any sense. We don't know what our rights are. We don't ask questions. We need a paradigm shift in how we think. We need to start asking questions, and we need to start saying no. A scary illustration, for me, the most scary illustration of how data, my human rights when it comes to data being abused is when I went for a regular HIV test, and they said, oh, you have to produce your national ID to get, before you can get an HIV test. It's a new thing, apparently, over here. And I spent 30 minutes saying no until I got my HIV test. Why? I mean, what does a Hippocratic oath mean? If a doctor can have you give all your details before he can give you an HIV test. Data privacy is a human right, but the message I want to put forward to Ugandans is that you have forgotten you have rights. You've spent 30 years being groomed to be rightless, and it's time to take that back. That's my message.
Thank you. Elvis.
Wow, I don't know what to say because it feels like everyone has said it all. But what I can say is just that privacy is my right.
What a way to drop the mic. So thank you very much to our panelists. This conversation is going to continue in our networking session after this. I think the question is data privacy a human right is a good opening line for all our conversations over lunch and the rest of the sessions we'll have after that. But I would like to thank you very much for making time to join us and sharing your great thoughts. If the audience, we could just give them a round of applause as we close. There are a couple of questions that have been posed to you, but I'm making sure we have all the contacts and you'll be ready to respond, ready and able to respond to them after this. To our extended audience that is viewing this session, thank you very much for following the event from Kampala, Uganda. We hope to continue following the conversation on the DRIF21 hashtag. And yeah, looking forward to the rest of the conversations from across Africa. Thank you very much. Exactly an hour, and we've closed.